Okay, we are live now. Okay, few people have joined in. I think more people will keep joining in as we go along. Let us first start with the introduction of the session. So all of you might be aware that today's session is basically on Next.js 13. And this is going to be an introductory an introductory webinar for people who are beginners into Next.js and are interested in knowing about what's new in Next.js 13. The topics that we will be covering is that we'll start with an introduction of or a brief overview of Next.js, its significance in the industry, and what are the new developments in Next.js 13. Understanding the basics and also getting to know some online resources, tutorials that you can use to upskill. So I'm quite happy to welcome Divyansh Gupta. He's a technical architect at Naukri.com, and he will be the speaker for the session today. He has more than 8 years of experience and is skilled in JavaScript and related frameworks like React and Angular. So without any further delay, Divyansh, you can start. Just one more thing that attendees who are there, please post in your questions. If you have any questions related to the topic, please post in the Q&A box, not on the chat. And we will take them up at the end of the, after the presentation is done. So yeah, Divyansh, you can begin.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Niharika. So first of all, hi everyone. I would like to thank Niharika and the Shiksha team for giving me this opportunity to connect with you all and be here with you. So today, as Niharika mentioned, I will be the speaker for today, and I will be taking you through everything about Next.js that at least I can cover from the beginner's perspective, right? So without further ado, let me just quickly tell something about myself. So my name is Divyansh Gupta, and currently I'm working as tech architect in Naukri.com, and I have a experience of about a decade in mainly JavaScript and its related frameworks, be it React, Angular, Vue. So JavaScript is my main inclination, and I love building things in JavaScript or web. So you can find me on Twitter on this handle, or you can reach me out on mail as well. So let's get started. Before we start Next.js, I will just quickly set the context for it, right? So what are the different rendering strategies that are currently available on web? Speaking for the first rendering strategy, the first one is the client-side rendering strategy, right? In this particular strategy, on the first step, the server will send response to the browser, right? And in the second step, browser downloads your JavaScript on the client machine. And in the third step, browser executes the JavaScript. And finally, your page becomes viewable and interactable, right? So as you can see in the last step only, the page to the particular user will become viewable or interactable in the last stage itself, right? So client-side strategy, or the client-side rendering strategy, or the CSR in short, is usually time-taking process, right? Or it does takes a lot of time. Another strategy, or the second rendering strategy that is available in web, is server-side rendering strategy, where speaking of the different steps involved, in the first step, the server will send the ready to be rendered HTML response to the browser, right? By ready to be rendered HTML, I mean to say that your content would be pre-rendered at the server side only, right? Because SSR does take the leverage of rendering your content on the server side itself, and then eventually it will send the content to the browser. So your content would be partially rendered here itself in the returned HTML as a response to the browser. In the second step, browser renders that particular page, which eventually becomes viewable. So as you can see in the second phase itself, your content becomes viewable, right? And then browser downloads the JavaScript, and then finally it executes the JavaScript. And in the last step, the page becomes finally interactable. So comparing it with the CSR strategy, the initial stage, or the initial representation of the page, is viewable to the user in the second step itself, right? So it reduces a lot of initial load time. So SSR in terms finally reduces the initial load time, but the page becomes finally interactable in last stage only. But again, there are certain problems with different server-side rendering frameworks. Speaking of the first major problem, so in order to make the page interactable in the last stage, the network payload that is being sent by any of the SSR framework is quite huge. Because there would be certain hydration steps involved in order to make the page interactive. The framework sends a lot of payload data, which is quite huge in size. Another problem is we need to maintain the dual rendering context, right? The developer needs to be aware of the fact that what contents need to be rendered at server side, which component to be made as a client side component, or so it involves a lot of mental overload. I mean, there should be hard boundaries defined between which component should be a client-based component, which component should be a server-side component. So these are the two major problems that were initially there in any of the SSR frameworks, or I could say at least in the Next.js previous versions, right? But what comes into the picture is Next 13, and it comes to the rescue by solving all these problems and thus providing you different capabilities and features on top of it. So what is Next.js essentially? It is a framework for building very fast or search engine friendly applications, and it's totally built on top of React. So again, I'm stating this, it's a framework, right? So it's a framework for building very fast or search engine friendly applications, and it's totally built on top of React. So if we compare React versus Next.js, React is a component UI library in itself. It's just a component UI library, right? But Next.js in itself is a complete comprehensive framework, which does provides you the support for library, different tools, the conventions inherently supported in it. So Next.js is complete framework, but React is just a component UI library, right? But what are the different components, or what Next.js comes with? It does comes with, the first thing is the compiler, which is capable of transforming and minifying your JavaScript code. Another thing is the command line interface, which is capable of building or starting your applications. And the last one is the Node.js runtime. So in order to execute JavaScript, the first thing you know is the browser is capable enough, right, to run your JavaScript. But let's say if you want to execute your JavaScript on server, then you need to have this Node.js runtime, which is inherently, or which is provided by Next.js in itself. So it's an environment which is capable of executing your JavaScript code on server. So these are the three prime entities that Next.js comes with. Moving forward, so Next.js, this is a main feature of Next.js. I mean, this is a main USP that you can build your front-end or back-end application using single code base, or your front-end code or back-end code is getting served from a single application only. So let's say if you have a big application and different components are there, so every component is getting served from a different every component is getting served from a single application, and it's written in a single programming language. In this case, it's React. So your backend code is getting executed in Node.js runtime, and your front-end code, which is bundled and is being sent to web browser, is getting executed on the Chrome or the browser, user's specific browser machine, right? So Next.js does provides you the best of the two worlds, the server-side rendering support as well, and the SEO support as well, right? So, but firstly, you cannot use state in this particular SSR framework, and you cannot use use effect on server side, but it's a server side rendered framework, and it does provides you the SEO capability. So it does provides you best of the two worlds, which is required in any enterprise application. So it does provides you the support for server side rendering technique and the SEO support as well. And many other more features are inherently supported. So I will take you through all these features through examples, through documentation, and each and everything that you need to know about all these features. So just quickly tell you all these features in very brief manner. So the first one is the router support, which does provide you support for nested layouts, the group layouts, which is currently in beta. So app router is in currently beta, and it does provide you the streaming support as well, support for progressive loading of your content, right? And it does provide you the support for writing your React server components, which is a terminology for defining React component on server side. And it does provides you major component improvements as well, inherently supported through its packages, like next font is there, next link is there, next script is there, and next image is there. So it does provides you a lot of advantages and features inherently supported in its own components. So it takes the leading production framework for React even further. So can we say Next.js is it the new standard in the industry? I mean, if you have seen React official documentation, they are also officially recommending to pick one of the frameworks and not use React as a complete framework in building your application, right? So React, the sole purpose of React is just to build the components out of it. And if you want to build a complete application, React official persons are also recommending you to use one of the React powered frameworks, be it Next.js or be it Remix, right? So you need to use frameworks now. Okay, so as a beginner, you might be wondering, I mean, which direction to go, how to get started, what path should I follow, right? So I will clarify all your doubts, starting first from the timeline of the Next.js. Speaking of the major versions of the Next.js that are released in very recent times. So first version that was a major version, about this version released about 8 to 10 months back, which is Next 12, and it does have the support for pre-rendering strategies, be it SSG, ISR, or SSR. So these are all pre-rendering strategies that were available in Next 12. Then comes up the major version, which is Next 13. Right, it does have the support for app router, which is currently in beta, and it provided the improved error reporting. It does provide you the support for server components, the layouts in pages, and then comes up the major version, which is worth mentioning here, which is Next 13.4, right? So Next 13.4 does provides additional features on top of app router, it does provide you the simplified data fetching technique, which I will mention in a very short. And then it does have the support for server actions as well, which is currently in alpha. And then finally, this is the major version that is available to be consumed in different application, which is Next 13.5. It does have certain memory improvements. It does have support of it is faster, and it does consumes less memory in comparisons to the previous version. So just to state the numbers, it's 22% faster in starting its local development environment. It's 29% faster in case of hot module reloading or in case of refresh. And it consumes 40% less memory as compared to the previous versions, and many other more improvements in or bug fixes in this particular version. Okay, so today I will go through the major features and how to get started, what are the different resources to essentially start with Next 13 development. Speaking of the first major feature, which is the app router, which becomes stable with Next 13.4, sorry, and it's built on top of React server components, right? It does provide you support for all these things. So the first one is if you want to create your shared layouts, if you want to create nested layouts, if you want to create nested routes, and let's say if you want to progressive loading or streaming your content, if you want to create the loading UI, if you want to create the error handling at any of the level, at any of the nested component hierarchy, or let's say if you want to create if you want to intercept your dynamic route handlers, or if you want to create your not found UI as well. So all these things can be very easily done through using app router. So earlier, if app router was not there into the picture, you need to handle all these cases through a lot of development, right? You need to create a lot of things. You need to write your code in a very large fragments, right? So in order to support any of these features, but Next.js 13.4 having this app router capability does provides you the advantage of handling all those things natively or inherently, right? So just giving you the two major files. So the first one is the root layout component and the page component. So these are the two major components that are need to be created in app router specifically. So your root layout file should be declared at the top, and your page component should be there. Right. So let me just take an example of this particular ecma.com and slash dashboard and slash settings. So let's say this is the URL path, right? So there are three major entities in it. First one is the root segment. So this first slash in this particular URL path is termed as the root segment. So your app router is completely driven through file structure. How your folders are created, it's completely driven through file structure. So in order to handle the root segment, you need to create the app directory in your root project directory, and then the first segment just after this first slash is a segment, and the last segment is known as the leaf segment. So for every segment, you need to create a nested folder. So this is our root segment. app folder would be there for the root segment, and for any URL segments, you need to create nested folders as you are going deep into the hierarchy, right? Okay, but speaking of the component hierarchy more, in case of the previous example itself, let's say the dashboard is there or the settings is there, right? So setting is, as you can see, the setting is nested, sitting in a nested hierarchy in relative to dashboard, right? But as I mentioned earlier as well, in order to create a generic layout, or in order to handle the UI, or in order to handle the loading state, you just simply needs to create these three files. I mean, Next.js automatically take care. Let's say if any error is occurring in dashboard component, then it automatically renders everything that is written here in error.js. It automatically renders this error.js if any error happens in dashboard. Similarly, if any error happens in settings component, then this component is automatically rendered. So it does take care of everything. You need not to handle all those scenarios by yourself. So you need to simply create files like this. So there would be a loading file as well. Let's say your dashboard component is asynchronously loading some data, or it's in waiting state. It's not currently rendered. So Next.js will render this particular file in for that particular period of time. Okay, so speaking of the hierarchy or the structure, how will it actually look like? So just focus on this particular purple background for the settings hierarchy, right? So speaking of the settings folder structure, initially at the most internal level, there would be your page component, right? And on top of it, it would be wrapped up by loading state, which would be wrapped up in suspense. So whenever your page is loading data or is in an asynchronous state, your loading state would be eventually rendered by Next.js automatically, right? And then on top of it, there would be a error component which is wrapped up in error boundary. So this is the major component hierarchy, and finally uh, everything is wrapped up in layout. And so this was the component hierarchy for the nested, or the component that is residing at the atomic level, or the leaf segment. Similarly, the parent component would be having the similar boundaries as well. So this is essentially the major component hierarchy that is defined. Okay, speaking of this, another major important feature or term, React Server Components. So this is the terminology for all those components which are supported in Next.js, and it's written on React. So Next.js does allows you to write your server components that are rendered on server itself, but are written in React. So all those components are termed as React Server Components. So let's say, again, taking the same example, acme.com, for example, this particular website has couple of components in it. Let's say it does have the nav bar, it does have the sidebar, and certain user interaction based components as well, like the search bar is there, the button is there, or different. These are also, the blue one are the client components, or the components that requires the user interaction. So your application does comprise of two types of components: the server based components, which are essentially just the layout components, there is no interaction needed there, and the blue components, which are the client based components, which does requires the interaction. So any application in Next.js does comprises of these two types of components: the client components or the React server components. Okay, so taking the previous example itself, so before the introduction of React server components, let's say if you are using this toggle button, right, which requires on click, or which requires the usage of state, as I mentioned earlier as well, now you cannot use state or click handlers in your React server components, right? So if you are using these components in purview of Next 13, it will show you the local development error that you cannot use your on click handlers, or you cannot import use state in a server component, right? In order to use these, you need to make this toggle component as a client component. And in order to define a client component, you need to mention this particular directive at the top of the component, which is use client. So as soon as you mention this particular directive at the top of the component, this particular component will be marked as a client component. because it requires the user interaction in it. So you can make your component as client, but by default, every component in Next.js is server component. So we have nothing mentioned here, right? We have not mentioned any directive here. So by default, it will be treated as server components. But in order to make any component as a client component, you need to declare this particular directive. Okay, so how will you eventually decide, or what do you need to do in order to decide which component should be server component or which component should be a client component? So there are certain parameters or factors that will eventually comes into role or comes into picture. If you want to, let's say, fetch your data, right? So then you can declare your component as a server component, because you need to take the power or leverage of server, right? And if, let's say, if you want to access any backend resources directly, then in that case as well, you can declare your component as a server component. If you want to, let's say, keep your sensitive information on the server, if you are using any tokens, API keys, a receptor, or any other sensitive kind of information, then again you can also leverage the power of server, because the client data is exposed in browser itself. Anyone can see the data. Or let's say if you want to keep the large dependencies on the server, reducing the client side JavaScript, then in that case as well, you can declare your component as server component. But in certain cases, it is mandatory to declare all those components as client components. The first one is, if, let's say, if you want to add the interaction, if you want to declare the event listeners, then in that case you need to declare your client components. You need to declare your components as client components, right? And if you want to use the if state methods of React or lifecycle hooks of React, then in that case as well, you need to declare client components. The two other major cases are, if, let's say, if you want to use the browser only APIs, or if you want to use any custom hooks that are dependent on states and effects, right? In that case as well, you need to declare your components as client components. Another great feature is the simplified data fetching. So in Next 13.4, your data fetching is greatly simplified. So let me just give you an example. Let's say on the left hand side, you have this particular component hierarchy, right? As I mentioned earlier as well, you need to declare your root layout component at the top. So let's say in this particular root layout component, you are making two fetch calls. Let's say these are represented by A and B. So these are two different fetch calls. Similarly, in another component in this particular method, you are making a fetch call to B. So these two calls are same, right? These are identified by B. And in this method, in another component, this is again, we are making a call to B. I mean, this is a fetch call B. And in different layout, we are making two different calls in which B is again there. And we are making a new different call, which is C. And we do have this another two types of component A and B, where we are making B and C. So all in all, the total, if we list down all requests here, so from top to bottom, request A is there, and we have 4 requests to B, and we have C, B, C, and A, B, and C, right? So what Next.js do automatically is it dedupes all those requests, right? So it does not makes all these calls by default. It will dedupe all those requests, and it will eventually make just only the 3 calls. So it automatically take care of these things, that if the request URL is same, and if the request headers are same, it will automatically dedupe all those requests and will eventually make just the 3 calls in itself. Okay, and apart from this, it does provides the benefit of caching or fetching the dynamic data or revalidating the data, right? So it does provides you the data fetching capabilities using the fetch API, right? And you can achieve different caching strategies as well. But by default, the first strategy is the force cache strategy, which is the default strategy, in which Next.js will automatically cache your data for an indefinite period, right? So this is a default strategy. But let's say if you want to fetch the data on every fetch request, you can use this no store option, which is the second fetching mechanism, where you can mention this cache parameter as no store. What will happen is that on each fetch request, your fresh data will be fetched every time, right? But in the third scenario, let's say if you want to revalidate your data, or if you want to purge your data and cache it at a regular interval, then you can use this third category or the third strategy, where you can mention something like this, that you want to revalidate your data and fetch this data at this particular regular interval, right? So the data fetching mechanism is greatly simplified using the native browser fetch API, right? So you just need to declare the fetch API method, and you need to declare these parameters in order to achieve three different types of fetching strategy, which is the default caching for indefinite period, the dynamic data fetching, and the revalidation of data. Right. The another major feature is the metadata API. So the beautiful thing of defining the metadata in Next.js is just to declare this particular object. So you can just simply create this metadata object and declare your title as home in any of the layout.js or let's say page.js, right? The output of just defining this particular object in your JSX will eventually result in this output. So it will create a head HTML tag, and it will create it will inject a title tag taking these values. So you just need to declare this metadata object in either of the file, or it can be present in any of the nested level, right? So it can be present in any of the nested component that is sitting in layout or page. So this is a static way of handling the metadata, right? Another way is to let's say if you have a scenario or situation where you want to fetch your metadata, or your metadata is at least dependent or is dynamic in nature, right? Or it's dependent on an API call, right? So let's say, taking this an example, if you want to fetch a different type of product on the basis of a certain parameter, right? So you are making an API call in this. In that case, you need to declare this particular function, which is generate metadata. So this is a terminology that is defined by Next.js. So in order to define your dynamic metadata, you need to declare this particular function, which is termed as, or which is known as, generate metadata. And in this, you can make any asynchronous call, but it should be asynchronous in method, right? So as you can see here, async is mentioned because it is asynchronous in nature, right? But it should return this metadata object. So your title is being now fetched from an API call. So get product will be making an API call, which will eventually returns a product for you, and you are fetching the title from that particular product. Output will again be the same. So there are two ways of achieving it: the static metadata and dynamic metadata. So see here, I mean, you just simply needs to declare this particular object, right? Next.js is automatically taking care of everything. It is automatically generating the output for meta tags, and this is just example of the title. Every meta tag is automatically supported in it. Another major feature is the server actions, which is currently in alpha. So this is another great thing. So I will give you a scenario. Let's say you have a form, right? And you have a text box where you can type any name, and on a press of a submit button, you need to insert that entry into a database, right? Which could be your SQL database. So previously, what you used to do is, this is your client component, right? But user will be putting the name of the product in browser itself, right? But what we want is, on click of submit, we want to modify the database which is residing at the server side. So previously, what you need to do is, you need to create your application layer, right? You need to create the middleware layer. You need to create your API route handlers. So whenever we are submitting this particular form, you need to create your API layer in between. But what server actions does allows you is to just simply create a function in which you can specify this particular directive, use server. As soon as you mention use server in any of the asynchronous function, this will be identified as a server action in Next.js. So what Next.js does, it makes it capable of, it will now be able to make any SQL query or DB insertion right there, just from the browser itself. So isn't it amazing? I mean, user is performing any action in the browser, and on a click of a submit button, user is now able to modify your data in your database right there from the browser itself. I mean, you need not to create any intermediate layers. You need not to create your API handlers as well. So it's just a matter of fact of writing just a single function, right? Which is a server action in this case. So it's currently in alpha support. It's now available in 13.4 and 13.5 as well. Moving forward, there are other great features. We do have font optimizations as well in Next Font. We do have certain image optimizations, and Core Web Vital improvement is also there. So Next.js does provides a lot of benefits or features inherently in it, which does improve your Core Web Vitals numbers, and it does have the link API improvement as well for better engagement. It introduced some client side hooks as well. It introduced special functions for server components as well. So I have written this Medium article where you can go through other important features as well in detail. So I will provide you the slides and you can go through that as well. Moving forward, so what we know so far and what we love mainly about it. So speaking from my personal experience, I mean, at Naukri, we have migrated most of our pages in Next.js 13 to be more specific. And the percentage enhancements or the features that are provided in Next 13 has greatly enhanced the web developer experience. And just saying for the fact, I mean, 100% of our URLs are in the good user experience just because of using this Next.js, and other obviously there are other optimizations done as well. But the percentage enhancements or the developer experience and the built-in SEO support is greatly amazing. Right, so let me just show you the quick demo or how to get started. So the first prerequisite or the first basic thing to get started with the development is that you need to have any version of Node which is greater than 16. So right now I have installed 16.8 in my application, and to create your application from the scratch, you can just simply type this command npx create next app @latest, or you can specify a specific version as well. So what it will do for you is it will create a next application with the latest version, and it will prompt you first the project name. Let's say I'm keeping the default. It will ask you the different features that you want to integrate in your application, right? So if it's asking in the first place if you want to integrate TypeScript as well, so I'm selecting no. It's asking for ESLint as well. It's asking for other features that are inherently supported. Would you like to use the source directly? So app router is by default now recommended. So it's from 13.4 it is now recommended because it's in the stable version. So I am currently selecting yes as yes here as well. So as soon as you complete all these steps, it will bootstrap your next application. So in order to save the time, I mean, I have created this app beforehand. So let me just show you this. Let me just start it for you. So you can run your app using npm run dev, which will start the dev version. So I need to use 16 version of Node. So your localhost dev server or your next server is started on port 3000, and you can see here it's the server gets started in this particular seconds. And if I show you the localhost 3000 window, so it will appear something like this. And as soon as you hit the URL, your page is compiled first time, and it took about 3.2 seconds in order to compile 484 modules, and it took about 263 ms in order to compile all the modules. For page module, it's 3.2 seconds. So it's compiling on the first load, and this is your first page that would be visible when you first time bootstrap your application using create next app. Okay, so yeah, so speaking of this folder structure, the major things are the next config. Here you can mention different configuration options. I will walk you through all the different configuration options as well and different links. This is in the source directory, we do have this app router. So we are using app router, which is default recommended. So in as you can see, there is a app folder present in it. And this is the global CSS. This is a root layout component. and the metadata is by default created for you. So if you see in the browser, the title would be this create next app, and the description would be set to this generated by create next app by default. So this is your layout file. This is your page file where the whole content of the page is visible to you. Right. So this is the first step how you can get started with your first app in Next.js. Moving forward. So yeah, so I mean, if you ask me, I mean, it's a superior developer experience, or its focus on performance, or the built-in SEO will eventually or definitely means that Next.js is a great choice for production apps. I mean, you can, if you are looking forward to create your enterprise application or a big production application, having all those SEO capabilities, the server-side rendering strategies, or improve core web vital numbers, then Next.js is definitely a great choice. And I will show you the different references, or the important references at least, how to get started. I mean, what are the different resources that you can refer to. So this is the blog where the Next team. So Next is completely developed by the two teams, I would say, the React and Next. So they are working very closely hand in hand together in order to develop this Next 30. So this is the blog where they keep on publishing everything about the new releases and all. So every concept is mentioned here. The second major link is the docs, where you can go through the different features. So it is classified into two parts. If you are using app router, or the features available in the page router. So by default, app router is recommended. But let's say if you want to skip the app router and you want to leverage the uh, older version of the router, which is the page router, you can choose for this documentation. But if you want to explore about the features, or you want to refer to the documentation of app router, then you can simply click on this, and then check on the different sections or the features which are greatly written in a very detailed manner. Let's say if you want to explore on routing, if you want to explore on data fetching, rendering, caching, or any other mechanism, and it's the docs are very great for understanding purpose. Then this is the foundation course, which is also yeah. And this is a foundational course that is officially recommended and provided by Next.js team. So you can refer to this foundational course where you can go step by step and learn different things, and evaluate yourself as well, and at the same time earn some points and get the goodies out of it. So this is the official foundational course. And then the Versal team, which is the major team that is behind the development of Next.js, does provide you different templates to get you started. So this is the boilerplate. And let's say if you want to create your image gallery out of Next.js, this is a template you can refer to. AI chatbot template is there, e-commerce website is there, dashboard template is there, app playground is there. So this is again the major playground app that is provided by the Next team. So all those concepts that I have mentioned earlier of app router, I mean the nested layouts, the group layouts. So let's say if you want to create the nested layouts, you can refer to this particular demo or the live playground, right? So I will just quickly show you one of the few demos. So let's say if you want to explore about how nested layouts are working. So taking the same example of acme.com, if your app is structured in a way that it does have the navigation to these four types of layouts, it does have the four navigation links. Electronics is there, clothing is there. So you can create your nested layouts out of this, right? You can create different layouts. So your parent root layout will remain same, the outer boundary, but for the children's you can create your nested layouts using app router. Similarly, you can group your layouts as well. So you can create group layouts for specific cases. Let's say if you are navigating from different layouts, you can share your layouts across, right? So you can for electronics, you can create a group layout for all type of electronics, or for clothing you can create a different category of group layouts, right? Then there is a parallel routes as well. You can create your parallel routes which is capable of intercepting the dynamic routes. So this is particularly advantage in case of let's say if you want to create a modal layer or any other layer. So you can refer all these things. There is again just quickly going through three of the major components as well. Then I will move on to the next slide. So create your loading states, right? So it is very easy in Next.js. You just simply need to create your loading file. So as soon as I'm moving from one tab to another, let's say I'm moving from homes to electronics. So this state is the loading state. So this is a shimmer state because the content is getting loaded, right? In order to achieve this, you just simply need to create a single file. So I have taken the checkout for this. So you can just simply refer, I mean, how easy it is. So this is a checkout for this particular app. I will provide you all those links. So this is a checkout for App Playground. And let me just show you the loading file. So this is the single file. I mean, Next.js just automatically renders this particular file whenever any of the component where it is used is in a loading state, right? So you need not to do anything. You just simply need to create your loading file. Similarly, you need to simply create your error file as well. So let's say if any of the error is getting triggered. So let's say I am triggering this error in this particular component, right? So on a button click, I will trigger this error. So anything that is written in error.jsx or error.tsx will automatically gets rendered by Next.js. You need not to do anything. So you can just simply create these files, loading.js, error.js, not found.js. So let's say we earlier we used to have these 4 type of navigations, but user types any other random URL into the page. So you can, let's say this category that actually does not exist on the website, right? And I am reaching this particular URL which does not exist, then you can just simply create not hyphen found file in your hierarchy. Next.js will automatically create everything for you. I mean, it will automatically render anything that is written in this particular file. So yeah, so you can go through all those app playground samples which are available as a playground in this particular URL. You can check out the code as well. I will provide you all those links. Then this is again the major documentation which you can go through for migration steps from moving from page router to app router. Or let's say if you are using earlier versions of Next.js and if you want to migrate to Next 13. And in the last, this is a Medium article which I have written in where we have mentioned all the Next 13 features and challenges and improvements. Yeah, so that was the main references that you can refer to get started and to get to know about everything, each and everything about Next.js. So that's all from my side. Thank you, everyone. And if you have any questions, then you can ask Niharika or me in the chat. Thank you.
Yeah, so we just had one question from someone on the YouTube chat. They just wanted you to explain SSR once again.
Okay. So SSR is basically server-side rendering strategy. I will just go back to the slide. So yeah, so SSR is primarily a server-side rendering strategy where in the first step, the server will send the ready to be rendered HTML response to browser. By ready to be rendered, I essentially mean to say that your HTML would be having certain content in it predefined. I mean, it would be rendered at the server only, right? And then in the second step, browser renders that particular response, or browser renders that particular page, which is now viewable to the user. So as you can see in the second state, or in the second step, user is now able to view this page, right? So unlike in the case of client-side rendering, this page becomes viewable at a very later stage and in the last stage itself. So SSR does provides you this capability that user will now be able to see the page in a very early stage. It reduces the initial load time of the page. So the page is now become viewable and browser downloads the JS. And in the third step, browser executes the JavaScript for you. And finally, the page becomes interactable. So these are the primary or major steps that are involved in server-side rendering.
Okay. So there were some questions that were shared at the time of registration. Since we have already like overshot a little, I'll just pick up one question that I found important. that why do we use Next.js instead of React and the difference between them.
Okay, so React is just a component library. React does provides you or provides the developers a mechanism to build the components, just the components, right? But Next.js is in itself is a comprehensive framework. I mean, it does provides a lot of capabilities. It does have the router in itself. It does have different rendering strategies as well. It does have the data fetching mechanism as well. So it's all in all, it's a complete framework in itself. But on the other hand, React is just a component library. And even as I mentioned earlier as well, React is now officially also recommending us to use framework where we want to build a complete web application or a enterprise grade application, right? So we need to leverage the power of server side rendering framework along with React. And speaking of the differences, again, React is just a component UI library. Next.js is, on the other hand, is a complete framework which is built on top of React. So the code that you write in Next.js is in React itself. And using a single programming language, I mean, using React only, you can create your server side components as well, or you can create client side component as well. So you are writing your code both at client side and server side in a single programming language, which is React.
Okay, so that brings us to the end of the session. I'm just quickly launching a poll for some of the attendees who are still here. You can just let us know if you like the session, if you know how likely would be you would recommend it to a friend of yours. Other than that, I think it was a pretty good session. You explained very well and quite intricately as well. So we have a few responses. Thanks a lot for sharing your feedback with us. This video will also be available on the YouTube channel. I'm just sharing the link where you can view this video once once this is up, the recording is up. Our thank you to all the attendees who joined. Thank you so much, Divyansh, for coming on board and sharing your insights with us. It was quite interactive and it was quite, I mean, the kind of insights you shared were quite in depth. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you, Niharika. Thank you everyone
Yeah.
for joining.